In this video, we're going to be going over the chat feature by ProAI. Now, you're probably familiar with the way ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and all those tools work, and you might be frustrated when you use those tools because you continuously have to provide it information about your business in order to get a contextually relevant response. And there are ways to provide that information permanently, but it's a little bit challenging. And sometimes, especially if the thread is really long, it starts to forget things. So that's the first thing that this does that you'll find very useful because whenever you create your account and you provide information about your business, it remembers that. And all of the responses that are provided by this chat tool are geared towards that information that you provided. And if you change the company that you have an account for, it will automatically update that information so that its responses are tailored for that business. Now, the other thing that it does is if you've noticed when you're using those tools, there is uh, a strategy to the way that you provide your instructions. And I want you to think about that like asking a human to create a cup of coffee for you. If you ask someone to create a cup of coffee, chances are it's not going to be how you want it. Um, and it's because you've just asked them for a cup of coffee, they're going to have their own set of instructions that they generate for themselves to complete that task for you. It's not necessarily that it's better, it's just not the way that you wanted it. And when you're working with a tool like a ChatGPT, or they don't always ask all of the information that's needed, and it can be kind of tedious at times to give it if it does ask. So if you want a cup of coffee made and you have a very specific way that you want it, then it helps to specify all of the details, all of the steps in order to produce that the way that you want it. And this tool is designed to minimize that through having templates of prompts so that it can solve it for you. Now, the other thing is you might be using these tools and getting there and saying, well, what questions should I ask or what can I do with it? And if you do a bit of research or you ask what information to ask, you can kind of pull it out and start to brainstorm with it, but it's not always readily available. So it's helpful sometimes to just have it in a giant menu that's specific to your business where you can just click a button and get a response. And that response has the correct instructions and it's tailored to your business. Now, the final thing to note about this that's also helpful to know about these tools in general right now is they all have different pros and different cons. There's things in Gemini that Claude doesn't have. There's things in ChatGPT that Gemini doesn't have, and vice versa. And a lot of professionals, when they're using these, they will use multiple ones. For instance, I use all of them. I use Gemini, I use Claude, I use ChatGPT, I use Perplexity. I use them for all for different things. Sometimes I use them, differently on mobile, on desktop. I'm using different agents for different tasks because they each have their own area of strengths. And what chat is designed to do in Pro AI is make it so you don't have to worry about that. So when you're asking a question or you're creating content or when we release other features, it's going to use the model that's best for that task so that you consistently have the best results. You don't have to worry about a new feature or new functionality coming out with a specific tool. It's already ready for you and it's already going to be routing it. So you just have to click a button and make some edits and you can get everything generated. So there are a few different ways to use this tool. And when you're using it, it's important to understand that this does not replace your consultant, doesn't replace your CPA, doesn't replace your marketing person. And that's just not a disclaimer, it's true. Personally, we haven't gotten rid of anybody, replaced anyone with AI. What we've done is used it to make them better. Now I can give them suggestions, I can give them some ideas. Sometimes they just haven't thought of it. And it is helpful for my own understanding of things that other people are doing so that what was previously unknown to me and I would have to ask them to explain, I can now get a response myself. So it's important to understand that this does not replace anyone. Now, with that being said, there's three ways to use this tool. The first way is business advice. Now, when this gets back to saying, what should I ask? These questions are generated based off of your business information, based off if you created a business plan, it's based off your business plan details. And these questions are designed to be useful whether you're just starting the business and you're doing initial planning, you're trying to grow the business on a quarterly or annual basis, or you're looking to enter a new industry that is tangential to your existing business that is not considered yet. In a 360 view of all the departments that you might not necessarily be at top of mind. So in this example, let's look at the most effective marketing channels to reach SMEs and promote our platform. I'm interested in brainstorming with this for whatever ideas that it has, and its responses are going to be specifically tailored to the business. So it says LinkedIn, industry events, email marketing, content marketing. Now, some of these I might have already considered, and one thing that you can do is go deeper into one of them specifically, let's say LinkedIn, and you can ask it follow-up questions and say, okay, well, what type of groups in LinkedIn should we target? What type of automation tools should we target? Should we even be using an automation tool? And how can we best use those filters in, let's say, Sales Navigator to put together a custom list? Now, those are things that are going to be continuous in the thread and can keep the thread. And because it has that core information about your business that it never forgets, all of its responses are going to be really super tailored to your business, and it's quite useful. And I would encourage you to go through each of these questions and consider them because whether you are just starting out or you're growing, they're important things to understand, and you might not necessarily have considered all of them. And if you did consider all of them, even if it provides you a small consideration that you had not thought of before, then it can also often be worth the time to go through this. Now, the second thing that's useful for this is the content creation. As I said before in the coffee example, providing those instructions, the prompt, is something that is really important. What a lot of new users do to these tools is they will just say, in the example, they will just say, go make me a cup of coffee or go write me a blog post for my website. And it will do it in generally in the the most direct way possible, and which is using, let's say, a drip coffee with Folgers or some other mainstream brand. Nothing against that, that's wrong. Some people prefer that. It's just the probably the most common, the most basic way. If you have really specific preferences, you want your beans roasted at a certain temperature, you want a specific type of espresso, and pressed in a certain way, it's not going to produce that for you. So the idea behind it is to try to shorten that so that it's not so generic. If you want something really specific, then you're going to have to spend some time with it. But at least instead of it making a basic Folgers drip coffee, it can maybe make you a artisanal French press. And it's a little bit better. It's a little bit closer to the final product. So let's look at a specific, example of a Facebook ad, and let's create or specifically an article about how SMEs can benefit from. So I'm not going to include any statistics, but let's just include something from Statista, and let's just write it in a concise tone and mention the sources at the end. And we're going to generate this article. And the interesting thing is it's going to be skewed towards our brand. And that's really important because when you're using a lot of these tools, you, because there is a degree of inconsistency in the response, it's really difficult to create on brand content. It's really difficult to create consistency in your operating procedures. And if you ask the tool to create an employee handbook, and then you, in a different thread, ask it to create a specific procedure within that handbook, then it may not necessarily be consistent in its responses. And that's extremely important from an operations perspective, as well as from a marketing and customer communication perspective. And I'm sure those tools are going to get better, but right now, how do you create consistency in what's produced and consistency in what's done? And that having that information contextually relevant is going to be really important. And as you can see, it has provided this response. And what we can do is specifically ask it any questions, any changes, and the same way that you would use any other chat tool. So I would encourage you to think about these as a way that you can kind of get as a starting point for different creatives, different copyright, different strategies as it relates to different things that you may be producing. And at a basic level, if you really are trying to save money, then you might be able to use them out of the box. But the way that we typically do it is we use it as a way to help our team members and our consultants be more productive. So we can renegotiate with them and say, well, what would my rate be if I wrote the article for you and you just needed to edit it? Well, now they can spend a lot more time on editing to produce something that's much higher quality, or they can spend that time with me over the phone doing strategy, or they can spend the time delving into the analytics and going into more detail and monitoring things. So it's a way that even if I have somebody that does these things, I can provide it for them and then renegotiate it and say, not necessarily, hey, let's lower your rate, but can you do more for me now that I'm cutting down your time in this area? Or can you spend more time with me on the phone doing strategy than writing the outline to this article now that I've provided it for you? So that's where this can be really useful. I would really encourage you to go through and see what content can be generated. Now, the other thing that can be done is obviously you can ask it any question that you would like, and it will respond within the context of your business. And you could just do that directly in the question section, and you can ask it specific questions about the plan. You can ask it specific questions about the market, and it will always skew towards your business. So it's important to consider that. Now, I'm really excited about this tool because we're going to be releasing a lot more functionality around it, a lot more integrations around it, and I think that as you use it more, especially as we release those new things, you're going to find that it's a really integral part of your business planning process. And it can really help you whether you're raising funding and trying to prepare for this, you are looking to just do quarterly expansion planning, or you're really looking to enter a new market or make some transformational changes and stay on top of industry trends. It can help you out with all of those things. And whenever you are thinking of things and coming up with ideas for a strategy, going to a tool like this will become increasingly common in your day-to-day operations, because whenever we're executing a business strategy, whenever we're looking at a business planning, oftentimes we are individually thinking within a box of our own experiences. And when we collaborate with somebody, we're expanding the size of that box, and we're collaborating with many people. Obviously, it's very, very large, but it becomes a little bit difficult to manage all of that because it creates a bureaucratic experience. So the question is, how can we expand the size of our box? Meaning, how can we generate more perspectives, generate more ideas, generate different things that we haven't considered, and make sure that it's all related to our business so that we can think about those things and share those things in ways that we haven't considered. Because the larger our box is, the wider range of things that we can consider, and the experience that we can draw on from others, in this case the training data, and in the future likely the ability to reason through scenarios, it will enhance our ability to make day-to-day decisions, month-to-month decisions, year-to-year decisions, and more likely arrive at an optimal solution from the beginning, and think about things that we could have avoided or could avoid that can create problems later on. And I'm not a huge fan of planning in general because I think that it is kind of a waste of time when you're trying to think about events that haven't happened yet and how you're going to respond to them, because there's so many. It's oftentimes way too incalculable, and there's way too many scenarios to consider. But if that were the case, then it would entirely useless. Then there would be no person who is better than another person at chess, because they would just say, well, there's too many scenarios. It doesn't make sense for me to think about all the scenarios. It makes sense for you to think about them for a period of time, consider how you would respond under certain events, and then keep them in the back of your mind. And if this event happens or that event happens, you can kind of remember that. And that's where a tool like this can be really useful. It's just spending a little bit of time making sure that if certain things happen or there's certain things you haven't thought about, both on the business strategy and strategic planning, but also on the content side, that you can expand your box of reason, diversify your experiences by yourself, so that when you do go to your people and you do go to your team, you can help them expand their box as well.